Discover the Women in Tech Trailblazers podcast, hosted by Tiffany, Benitez, and Jordan Franklin. Here, the complexities of being a woman in the tech industry are unraveled through discussions on key issues, personal growth, and how to succeed despite systematic challenges. It's a source of empowerment and inspiration for all women at all stages of their tech careers. We are so excited to join you today. And we have an amazing guest here that's going to talk to us about emotional intelligence. So I would like to introduce Kasturi. You will probably hear her called KJ throughout this show. It's kind of what we call her. She is a staff product manager at Walmart with the Tech Finance organization. She has not one, but two masters. So one in sociology and a second in advertising and marketing. She continues to be amazed at her life journey that actually has brought her into technology. So I'm excited to hear a little more about that. She's also an entrepreneur. She's a certified self-image and confidence coach. Ooh, I love that. And as a coach, she specializes in helping individuals overcome limiting beliefs and negative self-talk. We need to hear that, especially as women. And when she isn't busy managing stakeholders at Walmart or putting together workshops and developing and coaching her clients, you can find her enjoying a cup of chai and reading a book. That sounds so relaxing right now. And finally, she lives in Bentonville with her husband, her amazing 9-year-old son, and her two fur babies. So welcome to the show, KJ.
Hello.
Hey, welcome.
Hi.
So Tiffany always does the kickoff and the bio, and I always do the first question. So we'll kick off with the first question and kind of the purpose of our podcast. So we're here to really talk about things in technology that girls and women don't really talk about. We want to bring awareness to that and really talk about how to be authentic in your person and in this space. And our first question is, what does that word mean to you, right? What does authenticity mean to you?
Well, thank you, Jordan. So authenticity, it's a spoken about word, right? Like we're talking about it a lot, which is great. We do need to have that conversation. For me, authenticity equals to vulnerability. I don't think you can have one without the other. And one of the reasons I feel that we still are struggling with both of these things is because when we hear the word vulnerability, we think emotion. We think, oh, I need to bare my soul to somebody. And yes, you should be doing that. And you should be talking about the, hard things that we generally don't talk about. But the idea is that sometimes vulnerability means having a secure enough self image, having secure enough confidence in yourself that you're able to admit to mistakes. Sometimes it's okay to say that, hey, I messed up, or it's okay to say I'm sorry, or it's okay to say, I don't know what this means. Can you show me? Can you tell me? Being that is being vulnerable. And by doing that, I feel like you're bringing in your most authentic self when you do that, when you're secure enough to do that yourself.
Yeah. No, absolutely agreed. And that takes a lot of courage too, right?
Yes.
Like being able to show up and say, this is who I am. I'm shameless about who I am. This is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I expect you to give me the same respect, in that scenario, because it's really hard to be vulnerable or authentic when you're in a room full of people that aren't
Exactly. And that's where I said that secure in your own self. You need to have a secure self-image and secure enough confidence to know that this isn't the end of the world. If you say you don't know something, it's not the end of the world. You're going to figure it out and you have that confidence in yourself.
And I think confidence, to your point, though, and vulnerability as well, is admitting where you do have shortcomings, right?
Yes.
And admitting where you do need some work. Because sometimes you think you have it all together, right? And sometimes you think you have it all figured out. And I think we close ourselves off to actually receiving feedback to make ourselves better. No one loves to hear the things, right? But I think it's really important. And as you talk about vulnerability, that's not just like the pouring out with which, it's also the ability to receive. So I really love that you tied those things together. So when I shared your bio, you talked a little bit in the bio about your journey into tech. And so I'm really curious, can you share a little bit about that personal journey on how you came into technology and what really inspired you to pursue tech?
Honestly, nothing inspired me, and my journey into tech was purely accidental. I have a master's in sociology and I did another master's. And so my long term vision was to do a PhD. or something like that. And I did want, at some point, I toyed with the idea of getting into counseling because I've always been a people person. I've always been, giving advice and all of that, which is when I forayed into coaching later. But what happened is I got an interview with Walmart. I was living in Chicago with my husband and a newborn baby back then. They flew me in here from Chicago and interviewed me with this like huge panel and all of that. It worked out. And I said, okay. And I think a lot of my life, has been about saying okay to things. And I landed a job with Walmart. I started with cybersecurity, which is like the technology, right? Like it is so intense. And of course, I went through imposter syndrome. And of course, I felt like I don't deserve to be here. Please do not look at me type situations. But I do have confidence in my skills. And I banked on that confidence to be able to take me ahead. So I joined as a project manager, but now I'm a product manager in finance. And still sometimes, when I say that I work in technology, it kind of takes me back like a second to realize. But yeah, that is what I would want to say, that sometimes life is about saying yes. It is about saying, taking that chance, taking that risk, and putting yourself in a position that you've not been in before, and testing it out and seeing how that goes. So for me, being in technology wasn't typical stories that we hear about how inspiring that journey, like how inspired you are by technology, but it was accidental, but I still love it. I love it.
I love that you said a lot of really amazing things right there. But imposter syndrome, we've talked about that a lot, right? We had someone specifically come on. It's something we all deal with. But you said, I banked on the skills that I knew about myself.
Yes.
So there is something different about knowing what you bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And what will actually take you further in your career is your ability to know what you bring to the table, because otherwise, don't expect others to know that. If you don't know your value and worth, do not expect other people to do that. And what I think is really important here is that not only did you bank on your skills, right? So you did it, even if you didn't feel like I shouldn't be here, I'm not sure how I got here. That's one of those skills, right? As we start talking about what beyond our job titles and the software packages that we know and the languages we can code in, when you set all of that aside, what do you have that actually takes you forward? And I love that. I banked on my skills.
This is a trend that I see with women a lot, because when I'm coaching them into, applying to different roles, I have to tell them to think about transferable skills. Never think about a job bio or job description in terms of a limiting checklist. Think about what transferable skills you have. And working in advertising and marketing, my role was that of an account executive. I was between the client and the creative. So my job was to get work done. So when I landed this job as a project manager, and in the end, I looked at all of the, jargons that are there, I moved all of that out and I said, oh, basically, I need to get work done. I can do that.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you have to boil it down, you have to look at what skills you have. And yeah, that's go ahead, Jordan. Sorry.
Well, no, I was gonna say a lot of people in general are really not good at that, right? Like they come off as like, hey, I'm a really good communicator, and then in the end they're not, right? Or but if they're self-aware, they can't, and really that's one skill that everyone needs to hone is being self-aware, because that is exactly what you've been talking about this whole time, right? Is understanding when you can say, hey, I don't know this, like being okay to say that, like, but if you're self-aware, then you really know you don't know that, right? So you've got to get that information somewhere, but having that capability is what I'm hearing that you had, which is fantastic. And it's a skill that everyone should learn.
Yeah.
Okay, so in this journey, do you feel like you've encountered any bias or any moment in time where, since we're talking about EQ, so let's take it down that path too. Any time where your manager maybe didn't have EQ, their IQ could be really high, but their EQ could be like null, right? Is there any time where you've encountered any bias or any difficult hurdles with managers that don't have a good emotional quotient, in your career?
Yeah, it happens all the time. And it's not just managers, it's your peers that you work with. And it's sadly, it's not just in your work environment, it's otherwise also. Being an immigrant, being of the minority, this thing, I sort of have learned to navigate around these things. But specifically from a work perspective, of course, there are biases. There are gender biases, there are just, and sometimes it's not said, it's not what people say, right? It's mostly what people do, whether or not they include you in meetings. And sometimes it's not even that organized, right? Sometimes it is like, who do you prefer to have that aisle conversation with? Who do you go to from an expertise perspective? Whose opinion are you counting or banking on when you need to lean on somebody? So
Mm.
there's definitely a bias right there. And it comes out even in terms of the way you're labeled. I remember once a few years ago, somebody called me difficult, like, Kasturi, you don't have to be so difficult. And the only reason why they said that was because I was asking questions. And it was so early on. I've taught myself to ask questions. I wasn't that person who raised her hand and asked questions. I've taught myself to get there, and I wasn't going to stop. And I challenged some people, and that got a little uncomfortable. I did get into some sticky situations, and mentors have helped me through those sticky situations. But there is a lot of labeling that happens to a woman, that just because she is asking questions, just because she wants to be sure that we are going down the right path, that they are being difficult. Whereas a man, if they were to ask the same questions, they are not even labeled. There's nothing. Like, they might get a star, or they may not get a star, but there's no judgment happening on any front, whether positive or negative, right? But a woman always faces a negative judgment.
It's so true.
Those type of
I think you're really right. I think the hardest part on that is having to teach yourself the right way to ask the questions versus our counterparts not having to teach themselves anything. Because I get labeled as aggressive, right? Like, that's difficult, aggressive, same kind of like flavor. And I'm the same way. Like, I want to know, I call it checking for understanding, right? If I asked you the question 3 different ways, then all I'm doing is checking for understanding of what you're trying to tell me. And if I need a check for understanding, then other people are going to too. But I would rather do it here in a safe space than out in front of millions of people. I guess I've always been labeled that too. And it takes learning how to check for understanding efficiently, yet not bruise any egos in the room, so that you can make it to the next step, which is hard.
I think it is hard, but I think that there's an awareness thing. So the reason we talk about a lot of what we talk about on this show or in life in general, right, as women in technology, is that there's an awareness piece. So men are not women. They're not walking in our shoes. They don't understand how many things we have to go figure out and re-explain and ask it a certain way because of what we're talking about. But I think that the more that we talk about it, the more we bring awareness, because the reality as women is typically we don't talk about this stuff. Like, if we weren't on a show where we had teed this up, like, is it part of our daily conversation? Probably not, right? Like, some people put themselves in environments where they're intentional and they talk about it, but on the most part, we don't. So we as women, we don't talk about it. And so there is an importance as we talk about things changing, or where we bring in diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we have to talk about it, right? I use this example a lot. Like, I am not a woman of color. Like, I will not understand. You talked about being an immigrant. Like, I am not that. So I will not understand that unless you talk to me about it. And again, like, that's when I can walk beside you on a journey and hold your hand, and we can do this journey together. And I believe that we have to start talking about the bias. We have to start talking about the situations where we have to, like, repeat things 20 times, or we say something and someone takes the idea because they just maybe need some awareness and understanding. I think there are some one-off situations where maybe there's malintent, but mostly it's not. And as we talk about inclusive and collaborative tech teams, I always say the strongest table is the one with the most diversity, because you're going to get a plethora of experiences and opinions. And so what ways do you really believe that emotional intelligence, because that's a huge piece of it, right? How do you think emotional intelligence can really contribute to building those inclusive and collaborative tech teams?
Yeah. So one of the things, I just wanted to respond to one of the things that you said, Tiffany, and you said it really beautifully. You said that because you are not a woman of minority community, right? You don't know exactly what that journey has been. But that is where your emotional intelligence have the capacity to broaden your mind? Do you have the capacity to sit down and understand? And it goes not just at a people to people level, it goes at an organizational level, right? What are some things that you and I are being rated on when we are in our corporate jobs? What are some things that we get, we get our yearly increase or whatever, we get the rating of how you've been as an employee. What are some of those things that are we being rated on? Great stakeholder management because you had the capacity and to lend yourself or lend your intelligence in a different way. There was a difficult situation that I faced at work. Somebody, you know, escalated on me couple of levels. They escalated on me.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, Women in Technology of Northwest Arkansas and Gumption at my-gumption.com for their support. Their contributions are critical in bringing these meaningful conversations to you. Stick around for more engaging discussions right after this break.
And that situation, I think I came out of that situation so strong that that person who had escalated on me became my biggest champion. They voted for me for different awards and things like that. Did I ever get an acknowledgement from leadership that, oh my God, you've turned the tables around? It would not have happened unless I had the EQ to be able to deal with that situation. Because at the end of the day, I love to say this is my favorite thing. At the end of the day, all business is a people business. And it goes back to what you were asking about. How do you, when you start to understand that the people behind these technologies, the people behind software and the codes and all of that are people. They have insecurities, they have self-image issues, they are motivated by something and triggered by something else, right? Once you have that sort of intelligence to be able to understand what is driving them or what's not driving them, there in itself you've created an inclusive environment for people to feel like, hey, she may not understand exactly what this thing is, but does she have the capacity to stretch herself? Yes. When you start to do that, you start building a team that is not just productive and like great at delivery, but also a team that will stick with you. You will not face as much attrition as you see now with companies, because it is because of leaders that don't have the EQ to be able to make everybody feel like they belong on that team. And once that happens, no matter your skill, no matter how good a performer you are, unless you feel appreciated in the roles that you're in, you're not going to stick there. You're going to go looking for something else. And there have been instances like that, right, where my team has come and told me that the only reason we're in this job is because of you. Otherwise we would have left. But what I mean is that it needs to go from my level to a much higher level, where it becomes an intentional thing, where we are not just talking about it, we are putting that into practice. We are flexing these muscles of our brain that allow us to lend an understanding to somebody else. And I feel like that is the crux of building a team that is more inclusive, diverse, and feels like they belong, because they will continue to collaborate with you if you do that.
Yeah. It takes intentionality.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
and setting that intentional purpose from the beginning with a team, I think you get out more out of that team than even what you're putting in. But the intentionality of you putting in, hey, you know what, after that conversation we had, you did X, Y, and Z, and you're performing fantastically now, right? Like just having that recognition in the form that you want the recognition, right? Like it might not be a giant shout out. It might just be a small conversation, but like getting that recognition is very important, especially for us who love trophies and things like that. If you're motivated in that way, I mean, you don't even have to give me a trophy if you give me a kudos, right? Like that's how I know how I'm motivated. Tiny little trophies go a really long way, but that's different for everyone, right? And so if you as a manager or even a team contributor, right, take the time to understand how your teammates and counterparts are motivated, that's huge. It shouldn't be called going a step above and beyond, but it is going a step above and beyond from what's generally asked of people, and just genuinely caring.
Yeah, but the problem is that most people don't even have the EQ enough to distinguish.
Right.
They don't have the EQ to distinguish that, hey, this person is a high performer because of their EQ, or this other person is a high performer because of their hard skills, right? They don't have that capacity to think about it in those ways. And both those skill sets are needed. Both those skill sets have a place on the table, have a role that they have to play in the bigger picture. So that's the sad part, that not a lot of people have that.
Yeah, you said a couple of really key points. Number one, it starts from the top, right? So you just talked about how amazing like your team feels because you create that environment. And so as companies want to make more money, because let's be real, every company wants to make more money. So maybe you have to start digging in and asking from the top, what will allow me to make more money? Okay, if my people know that they matter, if they know that they're valued, if they know that they belong, what companies have missed is they will actually do double without you even asking. So number one, I think, yes, it absolutely starts from the top. Number two, every company sets aside like a requirement. It's even a goal at most companies. You have to complete X amount of training per quarter or per year, right? I mean, it was like that when I was at Walmart. It's like that here at Tyson, right? Like there is a training goal. We focus on all of these certifications that we have to go to the next level or go to the next role. But like, what if we prioritized EQ? Because the problem is most people don't really know much about it because it's not something that's required. Now, we know it's required to be successful. But I mean, like, if I think about what my company's asking of me and requiring of me, there's a piece of that that doesn't exist. I had a recent conversation with the CIO and we were talking about, in the development world, there's like a digital, like a citizen, like it's called a digital citizen, right? And this developer learns and knows all things about that. Well, what if we did that in the criteria that we're setting for even C-suite leaders, and then that trickles down, that EQ is required? Like, what does it mean for me to be a holistic, right, corporate citizen and required an additional path beyond all your certifications and what you know of EQ and really understanding people and how to work with them? Could you imagine how things would change?
You're absolutely right. And like we said before, right, there has to be an intentionality to these things. And it is not just, again, training is one part of it. It is active conversations, active, what is your company investing their time in? Like the culture of the company is very apparent whenever you join, and the culture that a leader is bringing and trickling down is also very apparent, because if they value things like these, you will start to feel like different things are valued on this team. You are valued for the skill set that you bring, not for the ones, or you're not like dinged on the things that you don't know. You see, like, I think there has to be, it has to be an overall intentional approach to have this as a widespread thing that people practice.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that a good point that you guys have brought up is, how do you train on it, right? Because there are people that just don't possess any sort of EQ, right? Not to dog on my husband, but we joke around with him. We're in a CEO roundtable, and one of the other CEOs asks him all the time. He's like, "So did you bring your feeling with you today? Just the one, right?" And it's a joke. He's grown to become more empathetic, right? But I mean, like, how do you train on that? Because some of it's trained out, like culturally, right? Some of it is trained out of our men, quite frankly, and some of it you're born with, right? Like my son is just really good emotionally. I mean, I could have an off day and he gets in the car and he's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I haven't even said a word." And then his twin sister is the exact opposite. It could go straight over her head. So like, how do you train on that, right? And how do you help harness it and keep it there? Because you can see the complete differences. I mean, I have a boy and girl twin, and growing up, and you can see the differences, and we have to train the emotional intelligence side for one, and the other one kind of came pre-wired, right? That's my question.
But even if it is from a training perspective, right? Even if it is teaching people how to pick up on nonverbal cues, right? We have trainings that tell us how to look out for dangers, right, around us, like say something if you see something.
Yeah.
How are you picking up those cues? Because you're being alert and aware. How about you receive training every quarter that tells you how do you pick up on non-verbal cues from people? What might they be trying to tell you? And when you don't understand what they are trying to tell you through their non-verbal cues, could you go and have a conversation with them? Could you ask them what was happening? There was a person that I used to work with a while back who there was a lot of reorg happening and there's a lot of churn happening in general. He was a high performer, but suddenly he was pushing back on things and, sort of becoming a little, I wouldn't use the word aggressive, but he wasn't being his usual self. And everybody around me said that, oh, it must be the reorg, like everything that is happening. Well, once I had a conversation with him, I found out that he was having a difficult family situation with his parent member not being well enough to receive, care and all of that. That is where his stress and anxiety was coming from. So, could we train people in, picking up these cues and having a conversation? Absolutely. And would that be all the way 100% through? Maybe not, but maybe it gets 20-25% better, right? And that's still worth it.
Yeah.
Some are wired and some are not. You said that,
Yeah.
Jordan. And while I agree with that, I would argue that in any other career. Some are wired to be amazing developers. Some have to work harder to learn that, but they still do it. They go figure out how to do it. And so I think it's creating the awareness that it's necessary. If you tell me I have to have this certification to do this job to earn a paycheck, I'm going to do it. So how do we start like bringing that in the same way we do the rest of training? You know what I mean? It's like, it's necessary. People matter. If you don't have people, your company's not doing anything. You're not making money. You're not doing anything.
You're not a company.
No, you're not. You're a person.
You're literally
You're
not.
a dictator.
Yeah.
But that's true. Like, it's definitely can be a learned skill, right? Some people are going to be just really great at it innately, and some people have to learn it, right? But I love what you said, that it's an awareness. It's not necessarily, which is a skill, right? But when you break it down to just being aware, like, duh, that's easy. Like, everyone can open their eyes. Get off your phone, like, open your eyes, have a real conversation with someone face to face or through Skype. You can still pick up on those nonverbal cues I just said Skype, through Teams or something. FYI, that dated me. But through whatever form, right? You can still see what's going on. Sorry, random statement. I have an intern and she doesn't know what a Rolodex is. So we had to have a conversation about that.
Speaking of
Just
dating
fun
ourselves, the Rolodex. Okay, I think that how do we then, as we talk about learning, and we've talked about training and all of that. So KJ, what are your thoughts on the importance of like mentorship and how that plays a role into really being able to almost hone into emotional intelligence? And how can you do that in a non-formal way? Like, how do you feel like sponsors and mentors can really help with that?
Okay, so I have a take on this, and you guys tell me how you feel about it. But I think women leaders should mentor men more and more and more. I'm not saying we should ignore our women folk, right? But if there is a new member on the team who's a male, he gets put in a mentoring circle with a woman leader. Because I have met great men leaders who have emotional intelligence, who are, okay to be vulnerable, who are okay admitting their mistakes, but more often than not, that doesn't happen. So while for women, a lot of these things come intuitively, to act on certain things intuitively when their own insecurities are not driving the conversation, when their own lack of confidence is not driving their conversation, they are still intuitively picking up on certain things. But like Jordan was also mentioning earlier, right? Men sometimes, I think these conversations that we are having, we should be having more of these with men. Let them be a little uncomfortable. Let them start being comfortable with getting uncomfortable. Because yes, these are sticky topics. Yes, these are feelings or whatever, right? But the more you get used to it, the better I feel that a company is going to start performing, even in terms of delivery and all of that, because you're able to retain more talent. I mean, I'm just taking it back to bare bones, right? You want your company to do well and you want to earn money, you want to retain your best talent, invest in emotional quotient. How do you do that? You do it by training your men, mentoring, sponsoring your men folk and teaching them how to do this, how to have the tough conversations. What is it that women might go through when they're going through a pregnancy or any of the big life changes, or just from a daily perspective, right? Women sometimes need a different sort of a conversation than a man would need to be able to motivate them, to be able to get them there.
Mhm.
So, mentoring is huge, not just for women to build their self confidence up, like I said, to bank on your skills, to be able to grow, but to our men as well. They need to be mentored by women leaders. And there should be official programs.
Yes.
Official programs that all companies run that, oh, here you're a male who's just been hired. A part of your thing is to go to this mentoring circle.
Yeah. Well, and I
What
also think, like you said, you've had some great, great mentors that were men with a high, EQ, right? I too have had that. And I think that was helpful too, because he pushed me to find a voice that communicated well in a large group, right? So not only did he pull the seat up to the table and set it right next to him, right? But he also made sure like everyone was listening. And I think that's helpful, especially like you said, if you cross mentor, I think that's really, I think that's really great. We've been cross mentoring for a long time because we've had no option. But I think that we need to offer that option to our young men that are coming into our industry as well.
Yeah. And like I said, right, if it is an option, it is an option. A lot of
Yeah.
people are going to vote out of it and say that, this is not for me. I'm raising a boy, so I feel very strongly about how do I sensitize him. He doesn't have any siblings. How do I sensitize him to what girls go through? Because his age girls are, their puberty journey soon. I don't want him to be the insensitive person that doesn't understand because he has not hit puberty yet, And when he hits puberty, I talk to him about that. That's it. It's
Yeah.
about teaching our boys young, and the same thing I feel applies in a work environment. You teach them, you talk to them, and maybe they're really great at it, and they can pass that knowledge on to somebody else. You never like I've had great men leaders who've shown so much empathy and really given me some of my biggest lessons that have come early on in my career have been from men leaders. So I'm very happy and very lucky to have had that. But for women who don't get that, I feel like this is the way to go.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so sad face. This is always my least favorite part of every show is coming up on the end, but we always try to leave with one final question. And so if you could offer one piece of advice to all of our listeners, know we've got men and women. So if you could offer one final piece of advice, what would that be?
It would be to pay it forward. So I am an entrepreneur, like you said earlier in my bio. I'm a coach. And one thing that I tell my clients is that not everybody has the means to be able to spend on getting a coach to deal with some of the things that they're facing, right? If you have experienced a transformation or if you have learned something new, pass it on. Yeah, pay it forward. So one thing that I would say, whatever it is that you learn, whether it's a soft skill, whether it is a hard skill, teach one person, bring them along. So that's what I would say.
I love it. That's what we say. More seats at the table, right? Turn
Yeah.
around and grab the hand of the next person behind you, and especially your sister, right? Like turn around and grab her hand because we need each other. So, okay, that's all the time we have for today. As usual, you will see her socials come across the end of the screen at the end of the episode. So please go out and follow her. Go check out. I'm going to reach out about the coaching. I'm actually really excited about that.
Mhm.
So I will be reaching out to you. Thank you to all of our listeners and followers for spending time with us here today. And if you need anything at all, reach out and let us know. We have some really amazing topics up and coming. And as usual, Jordan,
Please subscribe. Well, that's a wrap. Another episode of Women in Tech, Trailblazers podcast. Thanks for tuning in and sharing this time with us. If you liked what you heard, please share this episode with your friends in tech. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Your support helps us keep bringing in inspiring guests and uncovering topics that matter to you. Until next time, keep pushing boundaries and making your mark in the tech world. Goodbye for now.